Hey guys, so we're still waiting for that ban list to drop, but until then, let's just move on and try to map out some of the best rogue decks in the current format post Cyberstorm access using some Dueling Book data from YGeoScope.com as well as some regional topping information. And so this is a formula that I've been using for a while to calculate the tier scores, and you can always check my older videos to learn more details about it. And I also want to highlight Team Surpass, who's been compiling a lot of the regional topping information in a spreadsheet. I'll link that down below as well, and certainly make sure to check his YouTube channel Team Surpass as well. And so this is part of the formula for this video. And before we continue, a big thanks to my sponsors as usual, links and discount codes in the description below for Yu-Gi-Oh supplies. Now this was the May meta tier list overall that I did very recently, and this is some of the best decks. So basically for this video, because we're focusing just on rogue decks, we're not going to be including any decks in tier 1 or 2 except for Naturia Runic. I decided to still consider that as rogue because it's actually been on the decline lately, but up to Dragon Lake I did consider that as tier 2. Also, there are of course some limitations with YGeoScope. Most notably, these are some of the decks that are not identified, with Super Heavy Samurai and Pearly, for example, being the more recent ones because they are meta decks. And so in the meta tier list video, I explained how I had to just put them in manually instead without any data. Now, of course, this is a rogue tier list video, so they wouldn't be included in this video anyways. But something like, let's say, Manadium or Rika, unfortunately, will not be a part of this video. So starting off the rogue tier list for this month, we are starting off with Punk, and more specifically it's the Gold Pride Punk that actually got at least one regional top among like the 150 tops that were collected by Team Pass. It's being played a lot online as well on Dueling Book. Actually, majority of the rogue decks are with Punk, and I actually recently did a Punk Gold Pride deck profile as well with my friend Bester, so you can certainly check that out as well. So I think it's a really cool deck. I think good news for Punk players is that we do have a new tournament policy of a time extension of 45 minutes now instead of 40-minute rounds, which is a little bit helpful, I guess, when you're paying a lot of life points as Punk does. But you know what, it's a synchro based strategy. I think it seems really fun, so certainly let me know in the comments how you feel about the Gold Pride edition from Cyberstorm access. And then we have Dark World, which actually did not have any regional tops so far since Cyberstorm Access has released, at least not to our knowledge. Now, this actually did have several regional tops in last format before the new set release. And now, of course, part of the reason for that decline is that starting from near the end of that format where Naturia Runic became this one of the top strategies, so people were playing Droll a lot, which is really detrimental to the Dark World strategy. And now in this format, Droll is played even more because of Super Heavy Samurai and also to an extent Pearly. And so I think that's why, while it's still seeing a lot of play online, at least from a regional level event and above, it's not seeing too much success at the moment. It is getting some new support eventually, but you know what, until then I think it's still going to be sort of in that rogue contention for a while. And then we have Trap Tricks, which has certainly lost a lot of hype since the structure deck release, but you know what, it's still a solid deck, and it's getting these regional tops just before Cyberstorm Access format in Toronto Regionals. For example, I did a profile with Avery, who finished second place with this deck, despite being a relatively new player too, and Toronto Regionals pretty competitive, so that was really impressive. So this deck is very budget friendly. I think if for especially new players, this is probably the best deck to start off with. You know, it's not too overly complicated to play as well, and it's just really solid and very cheap to play, and really clearly shows that it can do well competitively as well, as long as you're a good pilot. And then last of the rogue A tier is Tearlaments, which is still hanging in there, had at least one regional top since Cyberstorm Access format has started. And so of course, with Kashir still being the best deck, and the whole banishing thing is not really great for Tearlaments. And ironically enough, even though Super Heavy Samurai and Pearly do not do any kind of banishing, but the funny thing is, because of that, there's probably going to be a little bit more rise in decks that are playing like shifter kind of effects again, sort of like the tier 0 format, so that might make it hard for Tearlaments, but for now I think it's still hanging in there. Moving on to the B tier, we have Shadal, and I'm a little bit concerned that the reason for this is actually more so because of Shadal Tearlaments. That's sort of beefing up the YGeoScope data, but at the same time, I think, because it's normally played as like a small Shadal package, but I think I have been seeing some lists floating around since the new branded support came out, where it's also being combined with Shadal as well. So I think at the very least, I still need to pay some respect to the Shadal strategy, whether it's a package or it's a full kind of core deck. But you know what, solid win percentage, no regional top yet with sort of like a key Shadal strategy, but I think it's always been really cool. And for those of you who started playing Yu-Gi-Oh during the pandemic or beyond, a fun fact, Shadal Invoked was actually the best deck just before everything started closing down because of the pandemic, and this was even before the Dogmatica cards came out. So it was this, Salamangreat, and I believe Spiral were the top decks, which is kind of funny to think about now that they're nowhere near that level anymore. In terms of next deck is Naturia, which has certainly fallen a lot since just a month ago when Cyberstorm Access was not out yet. This was really in contention of being second or third best deck of the format. Lots of draws. The problem now is that with Super Heavy Samurai, for example, if they're turboing out something like Exterior or something like Spell Cancer, that really screws any kind of runic based strategy, and so it's certainly a little bit of a harder position for them. So maybe that actually means that they're not even going to bother hitting the runic cards in the next ban list, even though a lot of people were thinking that some of the cards in that deck has to go. But at the same time, if they sort of hit something like Exterior or Spell Cancer or Cyber Sign in that sense, or maybe even CYAC, which sort of indirectly connects all of them, then maybe runic comes back, but then maybe they also get hit on the ban list too. And then we have I just clumped it as Red Eyes, which seems to kind of happen a lot on Dueling Book. I guess it's just sort of like Dragoon Turbo decks. Usually it's just Dragoon with like Floodgates, which can actually do pretty well in a lot of instances. It's of course very straightforward to play as well, and especially something online on Dueling Book, a lot of people will probably scoop fast and just move on. So especially in this format, I guess with Kashira, it is still the best deck, right, despite the new hype of Super Heavy as well as Pearly. And Dragoon is pretty strong against Kashira, and any kind of Floodgates can also be pretty strong against something like Super Heavy Samurai or Pearly as well. And then we have Hero, which 43% win percentage is really low for this month, but usually it's solid. It got at least one regional top, and I'm very confident in this deck in being able to get more regional tops. I think it's always really solid, and again, that macro Cosmos kind of banishing effect is again a lot more relevant now with something like Super Heavy Samurai or Pearly really needing to not get their stuff banished. So heroes always have some kind of win condition that's nice, especially let's say even against Branded, which is another still very popular deck because of the new support from Cyberstorm Access, and heroes can give a Dark Angel, which is essentially Imperial Order, so really strong against that strategy as well. So it has some really good win conditions at the moment. And then we have Dinosaur, which is interesting because it actually got at least 2 regional tops among like the 150 regional tops that were collected so far since Cyberstorm Access has started. And so it's really cool. 45% win percentage, obviously pretty low, but still I think it's really nice to see that Dino is being a rogue deck, still kicking it and still hanging in there, unlike a lot of other rogue decks which just completely fall off in play. Let's say something like Adamantipator, Virtual World decks that were also tier 1 but fell to rogue status and now just don't see any play at all, at least not at the level that would make it onto the tier list. And so another cool thing about Dinos is that in June I believe Wild Survivors will be coming out, so more Dino support. Now will Mist come back to at least 2? Who knows, but maybe, but certainly a really solid deck still. And then another old deck that's sort of coming back again in rogue play is Eldlich, and this is a deck that of course disappeared thanks to the release of Bestials that can just completely destroy this strategy because you're primarily playing only 2 Golden Lords, but you know what, Skill Drain is pretty strong, and as well as any other Floodgates. Something like there can be only one as well, which this deck can technically play, although it does mean that you can't really use your Eldlich traps in combination with your Golden Lords because they're all zombies. But this is sort of getting me excited too because I was actually playing Branded Invoked Eldlich last year, and I kind of want to bring that back, but just maybe more so Branded Eldlich. I think it's you know what, it is Floodgate-ish, but it's kind of like its grind game too. I think it's really interesting, so certainly something I want to try out as well again. And then we have C tier, and we're going to go with Fluandereeze. I think this has been sort of declining lately, and you know what, I don't really want to talk too much about this deck. I think I'm kind of sick of it, as well as most people probably. The Wind Barrier statue is gone, although ironically Marincess is now being able to turbo out the water statue, so that's I guess another new concern to deal with if they become a little better than Rogue. But you know what, somehow Flunder always does really well online, 55%, usually they're actually around 60% during its tier 1 status, but still pretty solid and hanging in there it seems. And speaking of Marincess, we do have that 50% win percentage for rogue deck. It's honestly really good from the historical trend that I've noticed since the years that I've been doing these kind of videos. And so Marincess, of course, has had some YCS success last format. So far, it doesn't seem like it has had any regional tops yet since Cyberstorm Access started, but it is relatively new into the format. I'm confident that this deck will do well again in this format as well. And again, if that water statue, I'm not sure how common that line of play is going to be anymore, but I think with the new support it can bring that out pretty easily, and it's kind of hard to out, so yeah, there's that. And then we have Dinomorphia, which is another deck that got some support lately in Cyberstorm Access. It got at least a counter trap, I know that for sure. 54% win percentage is actually pretty good. I was actually facing a Dinomorphia player recently on Dueling Book, and basically it has a really wild playstyle, right? Because of course they've always been known to pay half their life points to do like their fusion summons and whatnot, and I actually lost the game to a Dinomorphia player where the guy only had 92 life points, I believe, so less than 100. So it was like super annoying to lose like that, and it felt like you were so close to beating them, but really it's not, because they bring out the monster that's essentially kind of like a pseudo Mystic Mine. So I think it's really cool. The unfortunate thing is, despite the time extension of 45 minutes, when you're paying half life points as much as this deck does, you're probably going to have a hard time winning in time. And so at least at the regional level and above, there's probably at least going to be one player that's going to be slow playing you. So certainly not a deck that I personally would play anything beyond local level. And then we have Drytron, which is a really solid deck as well still. 51% win percentage. It had at least 2 regional tops as well. So really up there. I think the reason it got scored so low in this rogue tier list is that online on Dueling Book, it's actually not seeing that much play anymore. I'm kind of surprised with that. It's always been pretty relatively popular. And like I always say, when it comes to rogue decks, I think combo decks that are rogue have the best chance at least being relevant in the meta compared to something, like a mid-range or grindy or even like a beatdown going second deck like Cyber Dragon or Trains. When they're, rogue status level of those versions, it's really hard to do. But combo decks have really usually the best chance at least doing something in the meta. And then we have Dogmatica, which again is not really invoked anymore. It has new support from, I believe it was Photon Hypernova actually. I know at least one of the players that I did a deck profile with once, he was actually playing more of a going second variant, and this deck can like rip cards out of the extra deck, and it's pretty grindy as well. So I think it's really cool. I think the lore is really fantastic as well. Really cool to see, and you can definitely go check out those lore videos with Dogmatica and Branded and whatnot. It's really interesting. But you know what? I think it's still pretty solid. Nadir Servant is pretty popular again, more so in Branded, and they don't really play the Dogmatica stuff, but you can, so it's certainly there. Next we have Salamangreat, which it actually at least got 1 regional top since Cyberstorm Access format started, and of course it did have that YCS top last format as well, so it's still pretty relevant competitive wise, and it actually got some new support announced, which is nice. The downside is that the new support kind of sucks, but you know what, it is cyber strategy, and Konami is shown to provide a lot of generic cyber support as well. For example, let's say Cynet Mining, which came out in 2019, now it's like a common staple in something like Salamangreat, Marinsys, and MathMech, and I'm sure there will be more generic cyber support, something like Heatsoul as well as a recent one, and so I'm sure there will be some form of indirect support at the very least that will still keep Salamangreat at bay in terms of meta relevancy. And then we have Sky Striker, which is actually another deck where new support just got announced. Essentially, it's like a Link 2, and it's actually pretty good. Essentially, I believe just enables, access to Ray in the Grave more easily, as well as the access to Engage. So it's certainly interesting to see. They had some recent support as well, that a lot of it was not that great, but you know what? It's a deck that has, I believe, the most YCS tops of all decks in history, but Konami clearly has shown that they love this strategy and have provided continuous support, and in a way it always comes back to at least like tier 2 every now and then, so I'm sure that will happen again at some point in the future. And then next we have Tri-Brigade, which of course I believe, I'm going to assume this is maybe has some to do with Tri-Brigade Sprite, but just in general, it's certainly fallen down a lot in play lately. In terms of 43 win percentage is also pretty low. I'm not sure how the deck is doing in this new format with, Super Heavy Samurai as well as Pearly in the mix. I'm not sure how the matchups are. Of course, against Cashier, it's probably not a great matchup when things are getting vanished, and this deck really needs its grave, but there's a lot of Tri-Brigade lovers out there, and I'm sure they'll find a way to make this deck work still. So certainly let me know in the comments if you play this deck and how you feel it for this format. And then we have Satellar Knight, which is interesting. So this is a deck that I honestly don't know too much about. It actually was sort of beyond my playing career as well, because I started playing, 2019, and I actually remember playing someone in 2019 at a locals. He brought Satellar Knight, and I felt that it was a pretty bad deck, but he was telling me that at one point this deck was actually a tier 1 strategy. So I thought that was really interesting how fast, the game can evolve, and how a certain deck can be a tier 1 at one point and then now just really bad, just even a few years down the road. So certainly, hopefully it did actually get some new support in Cyberstorm Access, so maybe it becomes a solid rogue strategy again, and it's another deck that I would certainly appreciate it if any of you play it, and comment down below what kind of end board it produces, how you feel the new support helps this deck, and whether it actually is a relevant meta strategy, at least at a rogue level. And finally, we have Extra Sister, which is a deck that's certainly fallen off completely in play ever since Kashir came into the mix. But you know what? Maybe it's sort of relevant again because of Super Heavy Samurai and Pearly. I think there might be a little bit more increase in decks again that are trying to banish things just to keep those decks in checks. Of course, Kashir is the best at that, but you know what? In terms of rogue option, Extra Sister is certainly solid when it comes to like banishing, being able to play Under Shifter and things like that. Also being able to play some Floodgates. I'm not sure if something like Gozen Match is really that much relevant in this format, but it's there, and so I'm sure, you know, someone will figure out whether, and maybe they'll get a regional top or two in this new format. So anyways, that was it for the rogue tier list by the data for this month. Hopefully you found that interesting and maybe it helped you pick the next rogue deck to play. As usual, a big thanks to my Patreons for their continued support, and a big thanks to all of you for watching the video. So, well, take care guys.